Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at the absolutely terrifying scenario of a multi-million-dollar trade tanking before the ink even dries. We are talking about massive market moves, wild counterparty exposure, and what a supervisory principal literally has to do to stop their firm from bleeding cash.
Quick heads up, this explainer is brought to you by CertFuel. They've got a full Series 24 course with adaptive study quizzes, smart flashcards, and unlimited practice exams weighted just like the real thing. Definitely check it out at certfuel.com. Okay, let's talk about Priya, the principal's absolute worst nightmare. Imagine sitting at your desk, watching the market completely implode on a huge position you just agreed to buy, and realizing the guy on the other side of the trade might just totally ghost you.
Section 1. The Unsettled Trade Crisis. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this with a totally ridiculous but hopefully memorable hypothetical. Let's introduce Priya, the principal. She supervises operations at her firm, and she just executed a massive block trade of rocket-powered roller skates with Calvin, the counterparty, over at another firm. Sounds like a great deal, right? But here's the catch. A crisis hits before the trade actually settles. Right now, Priya and Calvin are locked in what's called an uncompleted contract. This is simply a trade that's been agreed upon but hasn't settled yet, and during that waiting period, it carries serious counterparty exposure. Let's say the market price for those ridiculous skates absolutely plummets between the trade date and the settlement date. If Priya is the seller, she is dangerously exposed to a loss. If Calvin looks at his crashing roller skate stock, decides he doesn't want to pay the original high price, and just walks away.
So, to protect herself and her firm, the mark-to-market rule allows Priya to execute this exact sequence to demand a deposit from Calvin to cover the loss. Let's walk through the steps. Step 1, they trade at $50 a share. Step 2, the market drops to $48 before settlement. Step 3, Priya, if exposed, Calvin is sitting on a $2 paper loss and might literally run for the hills. Step 4, Priya demands a mark-to-market deposit. Step 5, Calvin deposits the funds, and Step 6, the mark is updated periodically as the market continues to move.
The absolutely crucial point here is understanding exactly how much cash is changing hands. So, pause the explainer for a second, read the screen. How much money can Priya actually demand from Calvin? Is Priya demanding the full $50 value of the uncompleted contract or something else? Lock in your answer.
The answer is, she only demands the unrealized loss. That is the exact difference between the contract price and the current market price. In our roller skate example, she's demanding $2 per share, not the full $50 notional value of the skates. It's just the difference.
Now, what's really interesting here is the trap they love to set for you. Exam trap, watch out for this on the test. The rule says a member may demand a deposit. That means it's entirely permissive. Priya chooses whether to demand it. It's not legally mandated that she must demand it, but, think about it. If Priya doesn't demand it, she leaves her firm completely unmitigated against counterparty risk. If Calvin defaults, and she didn't ask for the mark, Priya's firm eats that loss, and she is going to have a very, very uncomfortable meeting with her compliance department.
Section 2. The deposit locations.
So Priya has demanded the cash. Calvin says, "Fine, Priya, here is the money." But where does Calvin actually put the money? There are exactly 3 valid locations where Calvin can place these funds as collateral. Lock this number in your head. 3.
Calvin must place the funds in one of these 3 places. Directly with the demanding member, which is Priya's firm, with a third-party depository, or with a member of the Federal Reserve System. That is it. Those are his options. He can't just Venmo her. And remember, this deposit is just collateral holding the trade together. It's not a transfer of ownership of the roller skates.
And here comes another exam trap. The exam will try to trick you with terms like weekly or at settlement when asking how often this deposit is updated. But the preferred cadence for recalculating and topping up the mark is daily, as the market moves. If those skates drop to $46 tomorrow, Priya is picking up the phone and demanding another $2 a share. Daily, people.
Section 3. Dealing with counterparty default.
Now, what happens if Calvin, the counterparty, simply ignores Priya's demand and refuses to hand over the cash? He just ghosts her. Time for another pattern interrupt. Pause the explainer again. If Calvin fails to deposit, can Priya just ignore the failure, shrug her shoulders, and continue carrying the trade until settlement day, hoping it all works out?
Absolutely no. Failure to deposit a properly demanded mark is a default event. You cannot just let it slide. If Calvin fails to deposit within the specified time, Priya may immediately issue a buy-in or sellout notice under the closeout framework. Calvin's trade is closed out, and he owes Priya's firm any difference between the closeout price and their original $50 contract price.
Section 4. Intermember mark versus customer margin.
Let's see how this builds into the broader supervisory picture, because the exam absolutely loves to test your ability to separate Calvin the counterparty from our other favorite character, Carla the customer. This brilliantly illustrates the difference between these parallel regimes. On one side, we have the intermember mark. This is member to member. It protects the demanding member on an uncompleted street-side contract. This is Priya dealing with Calvin. It's external. On the other side, we have customer margin maintenance. This is firm to customer. It protects the firm's exposure on a customer margin account. This is Priya dealing with Carla the customer when Carla's account equity drops too low. It's internal. They operate under completely different rulebooks, but Priya the principal supervises both of these risks in parallel.
Another massive exam trap right here. The intermember mark applies to uncompleted contracts only. Once that ridiculous trade for the rocket-powered roller skates finally reaches settlement day and the trade settles, the mark-to-market rule completely vanishes. Poof, gone. At that point, the exposure converts into settled position risk, which is covered by net capital, not the mark-to-market rules.
Section 5. Priya's supervisory checklist. Okay, we've covered the mechanics, the default, and the differences. Let's look at exactly what Priya the principal must actually do at her desk to keep her firm out of trouble and keep her compliance record clean. This is her supervisory checklist. Priya must verify that her firm's written supervisory procedures, or WSPs for short, specify exactly when and how to demand a mark. She also has to verify the WSPs detail how to deposit a mark if the tables are turned and Calvin demands cash from her firm. She must rigorously track open contracts and current market prices so she knows exactly when a trade is underwater. And finally, she must document every single mark demand and deposit so it survives for the audit trail. As we always say, if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
I will leave you with this final provocative thought to test your understanding. If the market suddenly rallies tomorrow and the price of those roller skates shoots back up to $52, moving back in Calvin's favor, what must Priya do with that $2 per share deposit he gave her yesterday? Think about it. Because the market is dynamic and bilateral, Priya would be required to refund Calvin's excess deposit. It swings both ways, proving just how fluid and wild uncompleted contracts truly are. Learn this inside and out, keep your WSPs updated, and you're going to crush this section on exam day.